Morgan, thank you so, so much for being here, for joining us again. It's your second time on the Mary Marantz Show. And we're just, gosh, I've been looking forward to this since we got it on the calendar. So thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. Yes, it's so good to chat again.
Yeah. Yeah. I was telling you before we hopped on, the new book is stunning. It's breathtaking, both in the art and the words, of course. I also feel like, so the new book is called How Far You Have Come. And I feel like there is this, I don't know, like this beautiful weathering that's happened in these words, as opposed to the first book, All Along You Were Blooming. Um, and I just kind of wanted to like start with that. Like when you think about how far you have come, this looking back to honor instead of always constantly having our eyes on where we're not yet. Is there something that you have been walking through that message in particular felt so important, so timely for such a time as this?
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. So I became a parent.
Yeah.
So my son is 20 months now. I was like, when did I become a parent? I was
Yeah.
like, oh, all I have to do is think of how old he is, and that's when I became a parent. So 20 months ago,
Yeah.
whatever that is in years. Oh yeah, almost 2 years ago, I became a parent. And this is, pre the pandemic, where I was just noticing that my life was changing a lot. I spent a lot of my 20s on the road and traveling. And like, I literally started when I was 19. I backpacked through Europe. I studied abroad. Like, I did all of these things. And then my 20s was just up and down every coastline. And
Yeah.
my husband and I with my sister, like, we're just going and going. And I was getting to a point where I was just realizing that life felt like it was slowing down and it was changing in a different way. And again, this was pre-pandemic. It was just like, whoa, is my life gonna look different?
Mm.
And I think that first sort of initial feeling that I had was grief. It was just like, I feel like I'm leaving a part of who I am behind.
Yeah.
I've talked a lot about how I had a music career and I thought that was what I was going to be doing. And sadly, when it comes to music and a lot of the entertainment industry, once you get past like 25, you're
Mm.
considered old, especially if you're a woman. I mean, it's like it gets really tough, and people don't always perceive you as like, oh, an up and coming talent. So I was really sort of like, wow, like, am I leaving all of that behind? And what does that mean? So
Yeah.
there was definitely grief there. I gave birth to my son living in California. Even though I was born in California, I grew up in Georgia. So even a lot of like people that maybe I would ordinarily be around, I'm not around, like my grandparents and things like that. And it's just a lot of, wow, life feels drastically different. And I don't even know how to make sense of this.
Mm.
And as I sort of stepped into this role of being a parent and also working from home, I think that grift started to kind of, I don't want to say shift, but it sort of expanded into gratitude. So it
Mm.
was like, it started with grief and then it became like, okay, you know what? I don't know when I'm going to end up back on the road again. I don't know when I'm going to have the opportunity to be able to travel in the way that I love and see all the places that I never got to see.
Yeah.
But I am grateful that I had those moments and I want to honor those moments. And yeah, it's just so wild to me that I literally thought of all of that before the pandemic started.
Yeah.
And once that began, it was like, oh, this message is even more relevant now. And yeah, so that's sort of the heart of it. And it just so happened to be what I personally have been through. I just, from me talking to other people in my community, a lot of us are dealing with that right now.
Yeah.
Just life has changed. So how can we still honor our journey even if we feel like we're leaving certain parts of it behind?
Yeah, I love that. And the book is structured around this drive between Atlanta, Georgia, where you grew up, and California, where you had made a life for a while. Did I
Yeah.
did I see that you've
Yes.
moved? Are you
Yes. I
in
live in Arizona now.
Arizona?
So
Okay, nice.
yes, actually, while I was finishing the book, we were moving to Arizona and it was a pandemic inspired move.
Yeah.
And that is where we are now.
Yeah. So the book starts,
Yeah.
you're 6. the Summer Olympics are happening in Atlanta, Georgia. You're making this drive to California where you always felt like you were home, where you always felt like you were called. And there are these 8 states in between that you will cross through. And you say, I didn't know it at the time, but I'm going to end up crossing through them over and over through different parts of my life. And the first thing I thought of at that structure is, man, how powerful it is to have these certain like repeating rhythms or like home bases we return to, or just even traditions that allow us to come back and go, whoa, what has changed since the last time we've been here? So for us, we have a tradition of taking our Christmas card photo. This is not the same as just this beautiful, like windswept road trip, but we sit on these steps in our house and we take this photo. And each year we've gotten to see, as we've gotten, new dogs, or dogs have left, or this year dirt was in the photo, or, even just getting like the steps redone. And it's just sort of this like, because there is a constant, we can see what's changed. So
Yeah.
did you, like, when you were thinking of the concept for the book, was that where it started from, or did that kind of find you in the process, this idea that the constants remind us of the change?
Wow, that is such I just love how you laid that out. I don't think it was that clear in my mind. I wish I could just have you in my brain organizing
Yeah.
that for me. That was really helpful. But I would say that it actually started with I didn't plan on writing through the 8 states at first. I didn't
Mm,
see the continuity there. What happened was I knew that, so my last book, All Along You're Blooming, sort of the heart behind that was a flower, and thinking of a
mm,
flower blooming. That was the core, and everything that happens in life as we bloom. And I was like, okay, I feel like I want to kind of expand and go beyond the flower and look at the flower field. Well, maybe that's a field. Maybe that's landscape. Okay, let's look at different landscapes that I have a
mm.
connection. So I actually started looking at every place I had been all over the world. And I started, I think the first place I started was I mean, because I just love to travel. My first place that I actually started was on a sea in southern Greece, when I had taken a ferry from southern Greece to southern Italy. Because I was like, yeah, this is a cool story.
Yeah.
But I sat down to write it, and there actually wasn't much there. And there may be something there that I just couldn't see at the time. But I was like, I feel like that's the cool thing that I want to do. But maybe it's back home. Maybe it's
Mm,
a place that I wouldn't normally see as an adventurous or interesting story. So yeah, I was like, all right, well, let's literally start with where I grew up. And I just I and the book itself, I just realized this. I was like, let me start with the front porch, where my childhood home, and that is
yeah.
literally where the book starts, on the front porch. And I literally just worked my way from there, and I was just amazed because I was like, wow, there has been these moments in all of my life in all these different places, and I've never really dug in and seen the beauty of them. So let me just
Mm,
kind of mentally go through all these different places. So those are just the first dates that I went through,
yeah.
and kind of the first stories that came up. So yeah, I would say that the common thread that sort of brought me to being able to see what I like to say is like the beauty and the courage in each story. It's really just looking at the landscape itself,
Mm,
and seeing what it taught me. And it's been very fascinating to me how much that ends up connecting to my emotions about the place.
yeah.
Because I'm not naturally, I don't know naturally what I feel or how to express my emotions. Like, I need art, I need music, I need nature to kind of help bring that up. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's really fascinating how that all comes together.
Yeah, I love the concept too of just sort of like this concept of the front porch that is both symbolic for welcoming people in and returning home, but is also sort of like the perspective of us looking out at the world. There's like a country song about like my front porch looking in is like my favorite view kind of thing. This like the finding homes in these different places. And there's even like a scene of you in Texas where you're looking out at the landscape and considering if that could be home. And then there's a follow-up scene shortly after that of like the storms coming and the rain and the hail, and like, wait, I thought this was going to be the easy home, but like our problems continue to journey with us. So whether you like knew that or not, there is a quote in the book I wrote down that says, whenever I return to the road, I measure how far I've come, and I am free to reflect upon and reinvent the woman I want to be. So coming
Yes.
back to these like repeating places help us find ourselves and who we're becoming. You talk about the sort of like the next theme that really jumped out at me is this idea of we find ourselves, we find who we are, we find who we're becoming as we go. And you say, we head west along this faithful path to start again, hoping what we're searching for is just over the horizon. She laughs because she knows we will not find it on the other side. Oh no, what we're looking for, we find as we go. And so I'm just reading this and I'm like, Morgan, my goodness, like you're, first of all, speaking right to my heart, but also like, are you somebody who naturally finds beauty and rest and peace in the journey, in the we're not there yet, in the becoming? Or is that something that you write about because you need to remind yourself of that often? Because I'm like, I wish you would come tell me that every morning. And now you can with
Oh,
your book.
oh my goodness. I am definitely one who has to remind myself of that all the time. So I've been telling, cause I get asked that, like, how are you so positive? I'm like, y'all, please understand everything I write for someone else, I'm writing
Yeah,
it for myself.
that's right.
I am actively living through that. So yes, a lot of it is talking to, especially because again, it's hard to talk to myself in the present. I
Mm,
don't know why I struggle with that, but I'm very reflective and I remember a lot of things. So I can look at different points in my life and speak to that version of myself,
yeah,
which ends up speaking to where I am today,
right.
if that makes sense. I hope that's not too all over the place. But so when I wrote those words, I was thinking about 6-year-old Morgan.
Mm,
And as you even read them back to me, I'm like, yeah, that applies to me today as well.
me
So
too. Me
yeah,
too.
I think it's very interesting because we do obviously change in life, but
Mm,
I do think it's interesting that we some of the same things that maybe we needed to hear when we were younger, they still apply to us today. So
yeah. Do you think that that is something we are gonna, you and I and everybody listening are gonna experience until our deathbeds? You know, is that like a symptom of not being in heaven, for example? You know, like the fact that we feel like something's missing or we long for more. We always have our eyes on this arriving moment. Will
yes. Oh
that
my
ever
goodness.
go
Yeah.
away? Because
I don't think
I sort of long for
so.
that. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
I don't know if Earth is going to ever offer that.
Oh, yeah. There's like a famous C.S. Lewis quote about that
Yes.
somewhere that
Yes.
is oftentimes like either misattributed or changed, but it does kind of hit on that notion of yeah, that I think that longing that it kind of stays there. And I think in a way it doesn't feel like always feel like a good thing, but it definitely keeps us present for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
um, and it keeps us from staying asleep for too long, I
Mm.
think.
Yeah.
So that's sort of what I try to lean into even in this season right now. It's like, okay, if something is pulling me into that mystery, the unknown, this question that I don't have an answer for, it's like, okay, well, what can I do with that aliveness, now that I'm awakened to it?
Hmm.
And for me, a lot of that comes up in the form of art and poetry. I'm like, well, I can at least write about it. I'm like,
Yeah.
I can't fix it, but I can paint it out. I can,
Mm.
I can make music about it. I can write, and and even like during this time, I've just been encouraging so many people. I'm like, even if you don't consider yourself a creative or a writer, an artist, I'm like, please just do something that
Yeah.
allows you to get out all of those questions that you have. Like even if it's a journal or that no one ever sees, or a note in your notes app that you end up deleting.
Yeah.
Like I think it's just so important for us to have that because that, like you said, I think that longing does kind of persist throughout our lives.
Yeah. You did a post recently that I really loved, and you were kind of talking through your journaling process and getting words out of you. And then you used a tool to see words that came up a lot either an individual word or like you could make it two words together, three words. And you used that, my editor used that for words I use too often in my book.
Yeah.
Mary, we have
Look for
472
that.
justs. Maybe you can get rid of a few. But
Oh, are you
you,
adjust to? I am. Oh,
oh,
yeah.
yeah.
I have
Hmm.
to, I have to look for those too.
But you use that as like, listen, maybe this is something you want to pay attention to. Maybe this is like something that your words are trying to tell you about. And you can't do that. You can't count them up if you don't get them out first, which I think is really fascinating, right? You've got to like write them, even if no one in the world is going to see them yet, because they will begin to tell you things you need to know. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so hard to see it in real time, what's happening in our
Yeah.
lives. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that exercise. I mean, it's the website is just like, it's called wordcounter.net. It's nothing fancy, but I use it. I just copy and paste my words, and I'm like, wow, I have said just, it's oftentimes a
Yeah.
very popular one.
Yeah.
I've said trust 7 times this week. And yeah, it might not give me the next idea for a book or whatever, but it is something that I can notice and pay attention to. And that to me, just it gives me hope to have these little practices in my life that just encourage me to and remind me to see that wow, there is still beauty here
Yeah.
amidst all of the chaos. And actually, just last night, I wrote and posted a piece on my Instagram and it was called "Dear 16-Year-Old Me." And one of the lines in that was it said that I know that you feel lonely. Like there's still beauty here, even when you feel lonely. And that was something that I don't think the younger me saw as clearly. There are a lot of moments where I felt overwhelmed and anxious, and I'm like, yeah, if I could just tell her anything, I wouldn't even tell her to change herself or try to go hang out with those kids. I wouldn't tell her any of that. She's like, just notice there. It's just look. Do you see the sunset right now? Like, do you hear that music that you love? Like, just take that in. Those things matter. So
Yeah.
yeah, I've just been leaning into that a lot lately.
You know what I love about that? I did not even write this down to talk about, but as you were saying that, have you seen the new movie Soul? Have you watched it yet?
Oh yes, yes. I think I've
I
seen it like 4 times now.
ugly cried, like unconsolable, ugly cried at the end of that movie. And I mean, it just hit me. Like I was fine, I was fine, I was fine, I was fine. And then it was just like, because, it's just like even these things we love, like this state of
Yes,
flow, can
yes.
unplug us from being alive, from noticing.
Yeah,
And I was
that
just
that
like,
movie really convicted me
me
because
too.
for anyone who hasn't seen, I'm not spoiling it,
Yeah,
but
that's
there
right.
there's a scene where they're talking about flow, and I'm just like, oh, I thought it was going to go in a different direction, and I
Me
was like,
too.
oh, wait a second, like, yeah, I need to be a little mindful of that. So
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, so
yeah,
good. So everybody
that's
go watch Soul.
yes,
We say
yes,
that.
yes.
So there's a phrase that jumped out to me in one of the entries. You're talking about remembering your mom's laughter and the sibling secret handshake, and you said, "This is the fuel you'll need to journey wide." And I wrote that down and bolded it and italicized it. And I wanted to ask you, what does it mean to journey wide? Because I think maybe that was kind of convicting for me, because I think I get so laser focused on where I'm trying to arrive and where I'm trying to get to and where I'm trying to go. So talk about journeying wide.
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad that's one of my favorite favorite
Oh,
lines that I
nice.
wrote. So thank you, because it speaks to how I feel about journeying. I too am like I love my maps. Like even before we had Google Maps, like I was really into as a kid. I just wanted to look at the map. I wanted to know where we were going, and I would trace everything out. But the more I've grown up, the more I've traveled, the more I've seen that literally that journey is wider than it looks on the map. On the map, it's just like these little lines. But when you
Yeah.
actually get on the road, there are detours. There are places that you want to stop that you didn't realize that you wanted to stop. Like, oh, I didn't know we were going to pass this landmark. Let's take a detour and go there. Or I didn't know we were going to come up on this car accident and that's just changed everything and set us 4 hours behind. Or I
Hmm.
didn't consider this time zone change.
Yeah.
And it's like even when you plan it out perfectly and say, here's where we're going to leave, here's how we're going to get there, ultimately something isn't going the opposite of what you planned.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's terrible and sometimes it's also beautiful. So for me, that is about just embracing the wideness of the road, and
Mm.
to always consider, like, this might just be getting too specific, but it's something I do think about. I even like to think about how even when we're traveling down a road, it's like that's not the only path that has been carved on that particular landscape. When you
Mm.
think about it, when you think about even going far back to the indigenous people that were on that road years ago, it's like we see it as one way, like
Right.
concrete path that goes in this direction, but there's so much more. And I'll try not to go on and on about this, but
No, I'm
I'm really
loving it. I'm
passionate
like,
about
go,
it.
go, go.
Even there's so much about if you look at like the history of small towns and like the way that towns used to be set up, like they would come through and just build an interstate that just threw off the whole, like a whole community,
Yeah.
and split a community into parts just from one new road being built. So I think a lot about how, like, even being on that physical road has so much connotation associated with it.
Yeah.
And it's like we see it as going one way, but it's like at the same time there are all these other histories and there's all these other stories and
Yeah.
inroads that are just, it's so much bigger than us. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to write something about how to keep your eyes open to
Mm.
all of those possibilities, all of those little things, whether it's things that are happening in the car, such as the laughter, the music, or it's things happening outside the window. Yeah, I could talk about that forever.
Yeah. Well, there's also a part that you wrote about your fingers tracing the lines on the map, and their maps, roads on the map don't have finish lines. You never, on a map of the US, you're never like, okay, cross the finish line of that. Like
Yeah,
you can
we're at the
always,
end.
yeah, connect to another
Yeah,
road, go a different
there's no
way. Yeah.
end. Like, isn't that fascinating?
That
Like,
is fascinating.
especially when it comes to, I would say I'm a bit more loose in other areas of my life, but definitely when it comes to my career, I'm very much so like trajectory. This will happen at this time. This will happen at that time. You do this, you
Mm.
do that. And it's like, wow, if you actually look at the world, what actually works that way?
Yeah.
What actually has a start and end point? You're not going to find very many things.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like even roads that are
Mm.
human made, like they don't have these defined start and end points. And again, oh my gosh, I'm trying not to get too nerdy about it. But yeah, I just,
I love Nerdy
because
Morgan.
I
This
can
is
just
awesome.
go down like a little rabbit hole. Like, okay, how long is she going to talk about roads? But I'll just say there's a lot there. There's a
Yeah.
lot there. And that's what I hope with this book. I hope that it can show that I don't feel, especially that Georgia story in the first story in the book, it's not like an extraordinary story in the sense of like, here's this huge life defining moment that
Mm.
changed. It's a moment that you really could almost forget or pass by. And I think we all have stories like that. We have the big stories in our life,
Yeah.
but we also have like these little details, these little stories that reveal so much about our lives and the lives of the people around us that
Mm.
I'm just obsessed with that stuff. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm obsessed. And I think especially now that so many people are at home and just restricted and not able to do what they want to do, what we want to do, we can just a scroll through the camera roll on our phone, like
Mm.
literally zoom in on a photo that you took a year ago, and what do you see differently that you didn't see then?
Yeah.
I just think that process can be infinite. There's so
Mm.
much to that.
Tell us a little bit about the art. So each state has both a narrative writing from you and then also these poetry art pieces you've created. And it feels like each state's set of art kind of the similar color palette is there. And it's representing things that happen in the story you find out later. What was that informed? How much of the colors and the design was informed by the actual landscape of that state?
Ah.
How much was informed by the story? How much was informed by the way you just remembered it? Like, what were you thinking about when you were creating the actual palettes themselves?
Yes, I'm so glad that you noticed that because I actually was very strategic about that. And I laid that out before I started doing any of the artwork, which is different than last time. My last book, I was just sort of like, I went for each poem, I was like, what is the feeling of this poem? But I was like, okay, I have these 8 sections. I was like, there's got to be something there. So I
Mm,
actually went state by state and I was just like, let me just see what color I feel
yeah.
about this story in this state. And it's not the color of the state necessarily, but I was like, what color do I feel about this story? So
Mm,
Alabama, for instance, I think that was the first one. I was like, oh, it's blue. It's definitely
mm,
blue. Just the nature of that story, I couldn't get out of it. And I was like, well, a lake is blue. I was like, a lake has, water, it looks blue. All right, that works. So let's kind of see what comes along with blue. And I just sort of gradually added colors from there.
mm,
And Arizona was orange. I guess because I mean that story has a lot to do with the Grand Canyon,
mm.
and it was orange to me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I literally started with one color. And it's fascinating. I didn't realize this about myself until I would say the past year, and being in the pandemic, I just have a lot of time now to think about things I've never thought of.
Yeah.
And one of those has just been, I didn't realize, I've always known I've had a strong sensitivity to color, but
Mm,
I didn't realize how much color spoke to me about certain things.
yeah.
So I like the other day I had an idea of painting. I was like, I just want to try to paint emotions, like different things.
Mm, yeah.
And I started painting the word amused, and I was like, oh, it's green. I'm like, no, it's not. Like, why do where did this come from? So that's been really interesting to me, and I
Yeah.
definitely brought that to the book. I
Yeah.
think that color is its own character in the book in that way, and I
Mm.
definitely tried to bring that to life.
Okay, so you're gonna think, or maybe it's gonna, maybe it was a thing. I don't know, but this is something I got out of it a little bit, and I was interested to ask if that was ever a thought. Is as I was reading and I was going through the states, it kind of felt to me like Georgia started out in summer. It felt like Alabama went to the fall. I felt a winter from Mississippi, even though it was talking about hot, humid air, but just the like
Oh.
starkness of what was being described.
Mm.
And then it felt like coming into Louisiana was spring. And so I was like, is she, are we walking through
Oh my
seasons right
gosh,
now?
that is amazing. That is not intentional. But as you're saying that, I'm like, that feels right.
Yeah. Yeah. There's one of the
Wow.
first entries in Louisiana talks about like pinks
Ah,
blooming in the
oh my
spring and stuff. Yeah.
goodness. My goodness. Well,
Yeah.
wow.
There you go. Something to think about.
Now I
Yeah.
want to like go back and look through it and
Yeah.
see that. I hadn't
Yeah.
even seen that. That is, thank you.
Yeah, you know what? Actually, like speaking about Mississippi, I want to talk about that because the title of the book is How Far You've Come. And for the most part, we use that to encourage one another and we say, like, listen, like I know that you want to get places and I know you're trying to go somewhere, but like just turn around and look at how far you've come, like how far has already been accomplished. But that phrase can also be used as sort of a weapon of silence as well, right? So this like what are you hoping for? Like how much more do you want to see happen? And so talking about the Mississippi chapter in particular and the racial reckoning of this last summer, how far we've come was used a lot to say like what are you still hoping for? And I saw in your post during that time this like, you were exhausted and you were tired and you wanted to have the words and sometimes it was a song. And so I just want to talk a little bit or more to the point, listen from you about when how far we have come or how far you have come becomes like a so stop asking or so stop talking. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yes, that is 100% a very valid point, something that I think about a lot. And for me, I think that one big word that comes up thinking of that Mississippi chapter is reclaim, and
Mm,
reclaiming that story that you feel like you can't tell, or reclaiming the imagination that was lost.
yeah.
And as I talked about, that chapter is told from when I was younger, and I was discovering and learning a lot about slavery at that time. And also, as I was learning that, and I think it was just sort of my creative mind that I've always kind of had, I was just so so curious and hopeful for little black girls who never had birth certificates, whose names we'll never know. People in my own ancestry who didn't have birth certificates,
Hmm.
whose names that I'll never know. And yeah, it might be weird for some people, but I'm just like, I like making art that has hope for them, has hope
Mm.
for their story, even if it's just in an imaginative way. For me, I feel like that matters. And it matters to carry on those stories because, like you said, there are people out there who are like, no, we've had enough of that. We've moved past it. And it's like, no, 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 no. There's still so many untold stories.
Yeah.
And I may not have those actual stories. I may not be able to sit and go get coffee with her and hear her story,
Mm.
but I can imagine something for her, and I can imagine what could have been. And and yeah, I'm inspired a lot by Toni Morrison, who's
Mm.
written a lot about that in essay form, and then also her literal novels as well,
Yeah.
just about these, like, I think I forget which one, but I mean, she would literally read a news article
Mm.
and say, I'm going to write a novel about that and build this
Well,
whole world around it that didn't actually exist, but it could have been the story. It could have been the story. And yeah, I'm just really intrigued by that. And I think
mm.
I'm still learning about what that actually is in me and why I'm so passionate about it. But
Yeah.
I did want to highlight that moment in my life where I felt like it was ignited
Yeah.
because I was in this place where, and I mean, I say this as someone who grew up in the South, but it has never left me. I mean, when I'm in the South, I feel a lot of that struggle. So I think in some ways, for me as a young girl, as I was learning all these things and I was seeing these painful images, I think for me, like, that imagination was almost a form of survival.
Mm.
And it was a form of like, okay, yes, this happened. And at the same time, maybe this can happen too.
Mm.
Maybe I can shed light on this story in some way that shows that these are real people. Like, these aren't
Yeah.
just photos in history book.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, really passionate about that.
Yeah, well, I just started reading The Bluest Eye from Toni Morrison. So beautiful. And there's the scene that she talks about the marigolds didn't bloom because of something that's going on with the main character. And that just sort of like reminds me of like the way that you paint with the colors and the metaphors and the imagery. I was like, oh, that reminds me of Morgan. But so like in that chapter, you see a little girl in a photograph and you start to imagine stories for her. But there's the scene, going back to something we talked about earlier, where you're talking about she would have been holding on to her mother's hand, not being able to ask directions, running, and you were in a car being able to say are we there yet, how much further to go, and just going back to talking about like the roads versus like indigenous people crossing the country. Like there's a lot of ways these roads have been traveled, and that whole part just gave me chills. And like going over the river and it's black velvet, it was just, I mean, it was just so powerful and so beautiful. And I think a lot of this just kind of comes back to this idea of like words can give life or death, and they can be weapons or they can be things that give us freedom. And in a million ways, this book is a book that gives people freedom. It gives me freedom for like not trying to find finish lines, but it gives much, more important freedom in the form of putting stories to a blurry face in a photograph. I want to talk a little bit about when we feel like we've taken a wrong turn. You mentioned this earlier, and you have this quote that says, "You have followed the signs, but the map in your mind tells you this is not the way. You realize there's a way back, but it will take a little longer now. Exit, turn around, try again." And I know that there's so many people that I'm coaching right now. This is one of their biggest struggles is I'm terrified if I make one of these choices and I choose wrong, I'll waste time. And that this one wrong turn will take me much longer to get back on track. And Justin and I, this is so random, but we were in Newport like years ago, one of our first visits to Newport. And Newport, Rhode Island is just a series of one-way streets, like they let a cow walk down the field and made a street out of it, basically. And so we took one wrong turn, and to get back to where we were trying to go, it took like 7 more turns, to find our way back. And so there is this fear that goes back, I think, to our conversation about arriving and that there are no finish lines of like, if I choose one road or the other,
Hmm.
God is not going to get me where I need to be.
Hmm.
Right? He's going to be like,
Yeah.
well, I gave you the map. I gave you the option. You could have chosen, you chose wrong.
Yeah.
So speak a little bit to that, this like idea that even if we have to go back, start over, begin again, that
Yeah.
we can still get where we're supposed to be.
Oh, yes. That's something I think about a lot, and I thought about a lot as I was writing a lot of these pieces, because I feel that so much in my story of just, if I had done things differently, what would have happened? And yeah, that's very real for me.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest things that I've found a lot of peace in is just realizing that I'm not going to see it in real time. I'm not
Mm.
going to, when I make a decision, I don't know. It could be a decision that takes me down a path I don't want to go. But I just have to surrender that I may not know or be able to see that clearly until 10 years from now,
Mm.
20, 30 years from now. And I've been writing, I don't know if the actual word shows up a lot in the book, but I definitely thought about this a lot as I was writing about just decades.
Mm.
And I'm like, some of the, I mean, I'm 31, so I have a ways to go, but I'm like, these stories took decades to write. I could not have written like quite a few of these stories without having, they had to like be a part of me
Mm.
for decades in order to make some kind of sense. And like I said about the story that I wanted to write when I was on the sea and leaving southern Greece, like that, the end of that story might not find me for another 20 years.
Yeah.
I may not realize the connection that it was making. I know that it stands out to me. For some reason, I can still see that night on the water as clear as day.
Hmm.
And but I don't know what it's about.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
don't know what it's about, and I may not know for a very, very, very long time. And that's really hard. But I have started to challenge myself and practice just this attitude of like, I'm not going to know.
Mm.
I'm like, if I sign this contract, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to walk away from this and it's going to be like, oh, well, that was a learning lesson, or that was the best thing I ever did.
Right.
I don't know. So, yeah, it's very hard, but I do think I am slowly learning. And it's probably just because during the pandemic, what is time anymore? Like,
Right.
I'm like, how long have I been sitting here? I don't
Yeah.
know. I'm gonna stop counting
It's
days.
just a
Like,
construct at this
yeah.
point. It's, yeah.
I saw someone post it. They were like, I was 21 when this started, and now I'm 23. I'm like, yeah, yeah. Let's just not even gonna think about that.
Yeah.
So,
I love it.
maybe that's a positive thing. Like, maybe this is just a time to stop worrying about time. Like,
Mm.
to stop worrying about how long it's going to take to, it's like, it's going to come together in the way that it was meant to. And
Yeah.
it may take us a lifetime to figure it out.
Mm.
I even think about this too. I've had moments where I've been deeply inspired by my great great grandfather, who was born a slave
Mm.
and died free. And I've had so many revelations just thinking about that story.
Mm.
A man that I never actually got to meet or know, but I know that much.
Yeah.
And other things I know about my family. It's a lot to think about.
Mm.
I think about how, like, yeah, I am living out revelations from his story that
Mm.
he may not have ever seen.
Yeah.
And that is really humbling to think about, that I might be going through things right now that might not even make sense a couple of generations from now.
Yeah.
Like, there might be someone who picks up my poem, if I have a book that lasts that long, 2 generations after me,
Oh, it will.
that sees
Oh, yeah.
that sees something that I don't see.
Mm.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
Like, I may write something, I may create something that has an impact, but not until generations or centuries to come. And
Yeah.
that happens. There is an artist that I love. Her name is Hilma af Klint, and they're just now starting to realize that, oh, wait a second, we think she kind of started the abstract movement, and not some of the other guys. Maybe she had a little bit more
Wow.
credit than we thought. Just now figuring that out in recent years.
Hmm.
Did she live
Interesting.
to see? Did she live to see that?
Yeah.
Nope.
You know what?
Didn't know that the choices she was making back then
Mm.
were going to end up impacting artists like me years later. So,
Yeah. I feel like there could even be, so like two things I was thinking. One is a question, one's an observation. I feel like just across the board, we would all love a motherhood book from you. And even as you were speaking about this great great grandfather being born a slave and you having a son and just these, things that we might not even see the impact for generations. I feel like there's something about this like link to the past and link to the future that's just a book selfishly I want to read. And
well, I
also,
will
oh, go ahead.
jot that down.
Yeah, that's
I
right.
haven't thought much about that. Wow.
Yeah. And then the question is, when you were describing the Grease scene, do you know what color that is already?
Navy blue.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a deeper blue. And yeah, I'm just like, what is it? I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know. So I
Love that.
gotta sit with it for a while.
Yeah. So the next question I have for you is a super fun one. It's the topic of failure. And I think what's really powerful about this book, especially people who have found you from Instagram or Pinterest, and they have thus far known you as this very beautiful art, these very beautiful words, this very beautiful voice, and can be tempted to think, well, here's Morgan with her following and her platform and her books and her art. And like, surely, she has not known flops the way that I have known flops. She has not known struggles the way that I've known struggles, what have you. And first observation is I just love that we get kind of a peek into real like what real life day to day looks like you're ordering pizza in a scene, you're
Yeah.
paying bills, you're
Yeah.
buying a house, whatever, and it's like, oh right, Morgan's a real person. Like,
Yeah.
not just everything is beautiful like all the
Yeah.
time. So you cover a few different times in your life when you felt like you failed, and that is just such a exhale. Like, it's a permission for other people to breathe, because it goes back to everything we're talking about of like, you can still get where you're meant to be even if you failed. So talk a little bit about why it was important for you to include failure, and any of those you want to talk about specifically.
Oh, yes. I would say that the Alabama failure, that is the first time my own sister didn't even know that story.
Wow.
Like, and my sister and I are 2 years apart and we talk about everything.
Yeah.
I didn't even tell her that that was why I left that school.
Yeah.
She just thought, she was like, I thought you just like changed your mind. And she was like, oh, that's why you went to community college for a semester. I was like, yeah,
Yeah.
I had to start over
Yeah.
and had no money to do so. So, yeah, that story for me was very important to put in the book, because as hard as it was to tell, I was like, I needed a story like this when I was in that situation.
Mm.
Because that was at a time where social media wasn't what it is today, but we did have MySpace. I was very active in the Flickr world, if anyone remembers Flickr. I used to share photos, like be a part of these challenges and competitions, and I followed like a lot of other college students on there. Many of them were like just amazing photographers. Some of them went to like prestigious schools, and I was just like, who am I and what am I doing? Why am I even trying? And I just think about, I'm like, you know what? If I had read in the description of a photo on Flickr, a caption where someone had shared a story like that, I was like, that would have given me just a little bit more strength.
Mm.
And that would have just invited me into grace when I was not giving myself grace in that situation. I did not. I walked away feeling ashamed. I walked away feeling like I had let my family down. And, even though my parents were very much like, it's okay. Like they were very empathetic and helped me in that next season, that because I did end up getting to start over. But yeah, that's not how I felt when it happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
It felt astronomical. And I know that I have a lot of young people in my community, and I I was like, yeah, this is an opportunity to just be super clear about how this played out in my life. And if I could just help one person feel a little less ashamed, a little less
Mm,
insecure about their failure, then that matters.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that is why I got the courage to put it in the book.
Yeah, I love it. And it ties into this, the running theme we've been going with of, we have a set arrival time in our minds. We've mapped it out. We think we know when we're going to get someplace. We think we know how we're going to get someplace. And you have this part, even in the beginning when you're talking about Georgia, where you get stuck in traffic because of the Olympics and you say you'd wanted to leave much earlier in the day. You say, I realized that perhaps this was how it was meant to be. If we had left when my heart desired, we would have missed this clamoring scene. The whole world was right here in Georgia, and I almost missed this scene of beauty because I was too busy racing toward the next one. What a gift it was to be inconvenienced. And so that made me wonder, when's a time that 31-year-old Morgan has been inconvenienced recently?
Oh, it's such a good question. And I just love how you're mentioning so many of like my favorite lines.
Yeah.
So that just means so much because that is something I truly believe and still definitely still learning. So we
Mm.
just moved. We moved to Arizona and we actually just moved into a new house, which is super exciting. And at the same time, it is a renovation project.
Mm. Yeah.
And I kind of feel like nothing is going according to the time frame. Like what was it? It was something that got delivered yesterday. Oh yeah, so we're still putting doors up on some of the rooms
Yeah.
because like my husband pulled them down. He's like, we need new doors. And I was like, I feel like the old doors are fine, but we have new doors now. But so he has a contracting background and he's done a lot of this stuff. And I was like, wait, why is that door not put up? And he was like, "Oh, waiting for this tool to come in." I'm like, "Oh my gosh! Like, when is it gonna get here?" So I literally was like looking at the tracking. I'm like, "When does this tool get here so we can get the door?" So the second the doorbell rang and that tool came, I was like, "Patrick, it's here. You can fix the door." It's still sitting at the front door, and that was 3 days ago. So yeah, it's been a lot of things that it's interesting because part of me wants to be like, that's so petty. Like, why do you even care?
Mm.
But it's interesting how small things not working out can bring up something in me. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's, I think maybe it's because intellectually I know, okay, yeah, things aren't going to go according to plan, but I have this little caveat in my mind. I'm like, well, I at least need to have strong internet and, my packages to get here
Yeah.
when I want them to. So I think there's something really telling about that, and I'm trying to learn what is that in me that
Mm.
is not so flexible in this area,
Yeah.
because I think that because I don't think I talk about this much in the book, but I would say one of the biggest, I do talk about it in California actually, the California chapter. One of the biggest things in my family has been a lot of health issues. Like,
Mm.
every family's got their thing, and my family has just been just really scary diagnosis and just a lot of
Mm.
that. And I think that taught me at a young age of like, yeah, life is really scary and things are gonna not go according to plan.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of used to that. It's hard, but I'm used to that. So I think there's that part of me that's like, well, at least if I can get the little things to go according to plan, then
Yeah.
I'll be okay. So when those little things start not going according to plan, when the package is not here in time, when the door's not up the right way, when literally right before we got on this call, there was a leaf blower next door, and I thought he was an hour yard host. Like, that's not the time the leaf blower comes. Like, what is going on? It's
I
just
love
like,
it.
why is this? Yeah. So, to answer your question, that was a long way of answering your question. Lots of little things, and
Yeah.
and they are definitely teaching me.
Yeah, you know what it reminded me of? I have not read this book yet, but my coach actually was just suggesting it to me, and it's like the body knows or the body remembers or something, and it's
Oh,
talking
the body
about,
keeps score. Is it that
yes,
one?
yeah,
Yes.
that's it. Like
That,
these
yeah. That's that one. Yeah.
little things that give us huge reactions. It's like the body remembering times when it was much bigger or more traumatic or whatever.
Yes, for
So
sure.
maybe it's that. The last big the last big area I want to talk about, because we've talked about a lot, and you'd be amazed how much I cut just to even like keep this to a respectable amount. I was like, I just want to hang out with Morgan all day and be like, tell me about this part of life. But the last big area I want to talk about is this when these moments when you feel unseen. There's a lot of this theme in the book. I feel like of it's just times when you felt outside the circle or times when you felt like you weren't qualified enough. There's a part where you talk about when you've done the work and you still don't feel like anybody saw it. And I think that resonates so much with everybody listening. I know it resonates so much with me, these times when you feel like this is going to be it. Like, this is going to be this moment, that person's going to share it, or that person's going to invite me in, or whatever the case may be. Or like, you feel like you did all the right things. You swung for the fences, as it were, and you're still just driving on the road, and it's like, I'm out here in the middle of New Mexico or whatever, nobody's around. Nobody's like seeing this progress that I'm making.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about how we keep going, how we keep becoming, how we keep finding it as you go, when all of the work, all of the things we're producing feel so unseen to the world.
Oh, yes. Oh, that's a big one. And I was thinking about that this morning actually. And I feel like my answer is super cliche, but it's just real. I have found that so there are these moments where I like exactly what you just described. I don't even have to say it back because you just described it perfectly. Yeah, those feelings of being unseen and just asking those questions about what I'm doing and if other people even see it. I have found that the moments where I'm less worried about that, it's when I have a pretty clear vision and pretty clear conviction that what I've shared and what I've done is something that I believe in, even if no one else cares or sees it.
Yeah.
I just watched the documentary on HBO Max, which I highly recommend. It's called, I may be paraphrasing it, but it's called Black Art in the Absence of Light. And there's a monologue at the end by this artist. I forget his last name. His first name is Theaster, but he talks about that specific thing. And he's like, are you willing to do the work when no one sees you?
Yeah.
Because he just talks, because they're talking about all these Black artists who just didn't get credit throughout history and just bringing them to the light. And just sort of what I was saying about the other artists of just like having these artists who could make these massive contributions that ended up not being seen or respected in their lifetime. And he just talks about, are you willing to do the work anyway?
Yeah.
Do you believe in it enough? Like, what are you willing to do if you know that no one's going to see it?
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I have been sitting with, because as I've had moments now where my work has been seen, and I've had some really exciting moments that are just like, whoa, like, but they're moments. Those are mountain peak moments. Like I can't live for those. That doesn't happen every day, and it's not
Yeah.
supposed to happen every day. So I've just been going in the opposite direction. It's like, what kind of poem would I write if I knew that it was not going to be seen for 100 years?
Yeah.
What kind of words would I write? What kind of work would I do if I knew that no one was even going to know that I did it for until 50 years from now?
Yeah.
And that's really hard, but those are questions that I'm challenging myself with. And
Yeah.
even as recently as when I watched that documentary on Sunday, and it has just been on my mind a lot lately of just, what kind of work am I willing to do if I know no one is going to see it? And I think that is what gives me peace, that when I do put work out there, and whatever the reception is, I'm like, well, I know it came from a true, honest place.
Yeah.
And I also have this moment too. Just last night, I shared something. It was that Dear 60-Year-Old Me piece.
Yeah.
that I mentioned earlier. I was super proud of it. And the social media engagement from it was not great.
Isn't that the
It just
funniest?
wasn't. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was like, wow, that to me felt like one of the most sincere things
Yeah.
that I have done in a long time. I loved creating it. It took a lot of time. And yeah, it for whatever reason, it did not perform the way that it should, but
Mm.
I was proud, or I thought it should, but I was proud of myself because I was like, I know that that was a message that I believed in.
Yeah. Is
And
this what the background was sort of like zooming? It was like blue and then
yes,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah, that was beautiful. I love
Thank
that.
you. And
Yes.
a lot of it doesn't even have to do so much with individual people liking it. It's algorithms. Like there's just no,
Yeah.
there's so much stuff going on. Like
Sometimes I
it's
think
like,
when something is
yeah.
that beautiful or that profound, this is how I experienced it. I was just like watching it and mesmerized by it, and then I just like went to ponder it. And like I think sometimes it makes it when it is that engaging, like we forget to,
Oh,
do you know what I
that's a
mean? Or leave a
really
comment or
good.
something. It's like
I
I
have
gotta go
never thought of
think about this, you know?
I've
So
never thought of it that way.
yeah.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That's a really good point. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's there's so many factors to it because you have to remember also of like these platforms are designed to keep people kind of scrolling along. Like they're not
Mm,
designed, it's not like a book,
right.
it's you can have a book that literally brings you to tears and changes changes your entire world, but if it were posted as a series on the Instagram story, no, like no one
People would
would
be like,
see
I
it.
can't wait this long. Tap, 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 tap. Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really good thing to remember for sure. But at the
Yeah.
end of the day, I was like, I know I posted that for 16-year-old me,
That's
and
right.
that feels valid,
Mm,
that
yeah.
feels valid. So yeah,
I want to
seeking more moments like that.
Yeah, I want to read from the book when you talk about these moments of feeling unseen. You say, the days ahead will not be easy. You will dive into waters unknown. You will listen for your name in crowded spaces. Unnoticed, you will feel like you'll never find your home. Listen to the story of the grass beneath your feet. Shout your name louder than ever before. Your journey may have acres of confusion, but for every step you take, your wisdom will grow all the more. And this kind of all comes back to even what we were talking about earlier of just get the words out, even if nobody's going to see them. Sometimes you just have to get these words inside you out on the page. You have to tell your story, even if you tell it differently than other people do, even if you don't feel like you're a writer. There are words inside you that the page needs to almost be the mirror back to you. Like you have to get them out so that the page can hold up a mirror to you. And so I want to kind of wrap this up with thinking of the woman listening who's like, you know what, I have no desire to write a book. I have no desire to be, known on Instagram for my words, but I do feel like I have words inside me and I do feel like I have a story that needs to be told, at least to like my inner circle. And I just want to kind of like figure out what it looks like for that person to trust that that story matters if it's not poetic, if it's not beautiful. So what would you
Yes.
say to that woman?
Oh, I love that you asked that. Again, that was also something I was thinking about this morning.
Nice.
I was thinking about that because I also have a lot of people like that in my community as well who maybe are not sharing, and like you said, many don't even have the desire to share. And honestly, I don't know, a lot of creative artists might disagree with me on this, but I kind of think that's the best place to be. Because I feel like you now have an opportunity to see how your story plays out in real life. Because
Mm,
those of us who do write and create, that there ends up being this barrier there. No, it's really rewarding. It's rewarding to be able to share our art in this way. But sometimes it does, I don't know if you have this experience. Sometimes it does get tricky because it's like there's a part of you that you share as an author, as a writer, as a creative, but then like there's the real life part of you, and sometimes that gets,
yeah.
I don't know, like especially for me, like trying to even again, I end up writing this whole story about failing in college, and then my sister didn't even know about
Yeah,
it, and it's
that's
just
right.
like, Morgan, okay, how did that how did that happen?
Hmm.
But I think what I'm getting at is there's so many ways to tell your story that is really meaningful and impactful. And one example that I can think of is I feel like almost any time you end up eating a delicious meal from someone or something, there's always a story behind that recipe. It's
Mm,
either something they came up with and they're really proud of it, the person that they got it from, and then they made this change because they know that you don't eat this ingredient, so they did this. All of that is storytelling,
hmm.
and we actually need to eat more than we need to read books. I love reading books, but
Right.
I can't, we have to eat every day. So there are all of these things, like people who lately I've been, like my mom, I mean, she is an artist, but just in a different way.
Mm,
everything in my parents' house has a story.
Yeah.
Everything, every pillow, every light, every little thing that my mom puts everywhere has a story. And lately, I've just been even just sort of, if I'm FaceTiming her, I'll just ask, I'm like, oh, what's that in the background? There's a whole story behind it.
Mm. Yeah.
And that's storytelling. Even if I'm the only person who's ever on the receiving end of that story, that that's impactful and that matters.
Mm.
And that's part of what all connects us. So I think there's so many versions of that. Like no matter who you are, there's something in your life where you want to tell the story about it. So you don't, it doesn't always have to be like, here's where I grew up and here's here's everything I've ever been through. It may just be you're really into certain tapestries or
Yeah.
certain plants or photography or just conversations with people, and you're funny, you're humorous, you have a way of saying things in a funny way. All of that is storytelling. And I feel like in many ways, as an artist, I'm actually trying to get back to that more
Mm.
and
Yeah.
just letting those sort of organic life stories just come to life and let them be in the moment and not worry about like, oh, I need to write that down or I need to jot that down.
Yeah.
I don't think we always have to do that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Like not everything is an Instagram post, Mary. Not everything is like a chapter in the
Yeah.
book, Mary. Like just
And it's
live
so
it.
hard because
Yeah.
especially if you're writing a book, you need that content, you know?
Yeah.
It's like you've got that word count. You're like, oh, I gotta get
Yeah.
every little story so I can make the word count.
That's right.
So in a
Because once
way,
we cut out the justs, we're going to
I
have
know,
like a
I know.
20,000 word deficit.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I want to read one quick line. You say, "What matters is that you are trusting that you do not need permission to write your narrative and have your say. It matters how you tell the story. No one else tells it that way." Morgan, let everybody know where they can get their hands on this book, where they can follow you on Instagram if they're not already. Some of the new stuff you're doing on Instagram with the voice in conjunction with the images. Like talk a little bit about what you have going on.
Yeah, so I have been just experimenting with art in different ways. It's probably because with my little one, I now watch a lot of animated animated things.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, that's kind of fun, huh? Maybe I'll do animation. So that's literally how it started, just watching kids shows with my son.
Mm.
So I've been playing around with animation and animating some of my words and then also bringing audio into the picture and
Mm.
reading some of my words and singing some of my words.
Yeah.
That's all for me. That's just fun. Like, I don't know, I don't know where it's going to lead, but it's really fun right now. It's bringing me a lot of joy in this time.
Mm.
And yeah, if you're interested in art and poetry and words, I do love to share that as well. And I also invite people to DM me and email me their stories, and I make things in response to actual stories that people share with me. And you can
Yeah.
find all of it on Morgan Harper Nichols on Instagram, as well as Pinterest
Mhm.
and YouTube. I'm pretty much a Morgan Harper Nichols everywhere. So
Yeah. And then the book itself, does it have a book website or anything they should know?
yeah, it's Morgan Harper Nichols. Is so long. Oh my gosh, this is the first time I've said it out loud. Wow. Okay, I have a long name and a blog book title. I'm not like you. You have like it's just like boom, boom,
Dirt.
boom.
Yeah.
Dirt. Perfect. I'm the exact opposite. Sorry, everyone. MorganHarperNichols.com/ how far you have come. But if you go to my website, I have like a big tab up there that says new book, so you can just click on that. MorganHarperNichols.com.
Amazing. Perfect. All right, friends. Well, the book is How Far You Have Come, Musings on Beauty and Courage. And I want to leave you with these words from Morgan. Tomorrow will be grand. Slow down. Take rest before you begin again. Make sure you get this book in your hands. It is beautiful. You're going to want to have it on your table. It is wise. It is heart-wrenching. It hits you right in the nerves, but it also then is like this beautiful salve to the wounds to tell you you have come so far. You will get there. There are no finish lines. We are not arriving. We are becoming as we go. Get this book in your hands. You are going to love it. I'm telling you right now, I love it. I am never putting this book down. Make sure you have it. And until then, this is the Mary Marantz Show.